Okay, in the last video, we talked about uh, pay, and we talked about it in terms of equilibrium pay, equilibrium wages, the idea that wages are set based on the supply and demand chart. And we talked about a few incidences where that might be not the case, but we talked mainly about how the human capital or signaling theory of what gets invested in a worker or a laborer sets wages. And so we can generally say that people are paid equilibrium wages. This section is a section where we're going to talk about when people are paid above equilibrium wages. How can we explain market conditions where the wages paid are very clearly above equilibrium? In other words, people are being paid more than the market bears. How can you explain this? Is it a good or bad thing? Actually, we've already talked about two of the major conditions that make up above equilibrium wages at different times, and we talked about them through Thomas Sowell. So we're going to get right into that, and I'm going to start with, come on over. That's okay. Thank you. I'm going to start with this question. When do above equilibrium wages occur? So, okay, to get this straight, what we're saying is the rule of thumb is equilibrium wages. The supply and demand of the marketplace set a person's wages, and we know that those wages have compensating differentials. We know that there are reasons that we can account for why some people are paid more than others. We know that people are not going to make the same in all different kinds of careers. But we would still say that in the world of doctors, equilibrium wages set what the doctors get paid. In the world of lawyers, in the world of garbage men, in the world of teachers, there is an equilibrium wage, supply and demand. So in other words, a advanced physics teacher is going to make more than a grammar school teacher, all things being equal. That's because even though they're both teachers, there are far less physics people with advanced degrees willing to go and make a teacher's wage. And so there are less of those in the marketplace than there would be a teacher who's qualified to teach grammar school. That's not making some kind of essential statement about the worth of the human being. It's making a logical and economic statement about wages. So what about when the market doesn't necessarily set the wage? We're talking about 3 times here when we have what are called above equilibrium wage. Get what we're talking about? We're talking about when equilibrium doesn't set the wage. And so we've talked about 2 of these before. Number 1, equilibrium doesn't really set the wage when you're talking about labor unions, because labor unions collectively bargain for a higher wage than would normally be set in the market. Number 2 is a government set minimum wage. When the government sets a law that a person cannot make less than a certain amount with a price floor, that creates a minimum wage, and that means that above equilibrium wages are being paid. And then third, we're going to talk about efficiency wages. This is what we'll spend most of our time in on this PowerPoint, because we have not talked about efficiency wages yet, except maybe one time I mentioned it in class real quickly. So let's just review the other 2 scenarios very quickly. We already talked about above efficiency wages in terms of labor unions. Remember my friend and yours from the missions trip, old Tommy, right? There's Tommy, and Tommy was our friend that worked at B.F. Goodrich for over 4 decades, and he worked there, and he was a major labor union guy, right? And so he talked about the negotiated wages and benefits packages that the union would seek to get for their workers. And like Tommy explained, a lot of the benefits that the labor union was bringing to workers in B.F. Goodrich was not so much, sorry guys, was not so much through actual pay rates, although the union probably had higher pay rates than non-union workers, but through the negotiation of their benefits package, that the retirement benefits, the health benefits, the fringe benefits that were offered to union workers were much higher than what the market would normally bear. And so when we have labor unions, we understand that through negotiation and power and leverage that is brought about by the collective, and that's why it's called collective bargaining, they bring all the workers' needs before the corporation, and they say, well, we'll walk out, we'll strike, we will collectively bargain. They bring their pressure to bear on the corporation, and they try to get the corporation to pay above equilibrium wages. That's just a fact. You can like labor unions, you cannot like labor unions. I'm not really here today to convince you of either way, but to make sure that you understand that from an economist perspective, whether you're talking about Thomas Sowell or you're talking about Mankiw or you're talking about Tommy himself, okay, they all agree that it's above equilibrium wage. It's more than the market would normally bear. That's why you join a labor union, okay, amongst other things such as brotherhood but even the fringe benefits of like, for example, if a teacher joins the teachers union so that he or she can get protection from lawsuits, that's why you join it, for the benefits. Do you know that in many cases it costs money to belong to a union, and that money is taken from your paycheck and it is paid to union dues so that the representatives from the union can get paid from the union and not from the corporation, part of their leadership salary and wages. Well, why would you do that? Because you believe that the union is going to get you something above and beyond what you would normally get, whether that is a special parking space at the very, very least, or whether that is a much higher rate of work and of wages or benefits than would normally happen. That's what above equilibrium wages are. So when a person works for a labor union, we can assume that if that labor union is doing its job, that it is negotiating with the corporation to be paid above equilibrium wages. Everybody get it? Okay, so when we have our supply and demand curve, right, and labor is being demanded and supplied at every price, and we have an equilibrium point, we see, okay, right there is where, oh, I pushed the erase, sorry. We say right there is where equilibrium should happen, okay? That's the magic spot. Well, a labor union is saying, no, that's not what we're going to pay. We're going to be paying something higher than that, right? That's above equilibrium pay, and it's what a labor union does. All right. The other thing, and what did Thomas Sowell think about labor unions? Well, he said that while labor unions might provide some benefits specifically to workers in the manufacturing fields or traditional fields where labor unions are held, they definitely protect the people on the inside looking out, not the outside looking in, right? Because if the corporation is paying above equilibrium wages, it's going to be harder to get a job if you are not a union person, because the union will try to keep you from being employed because they don't want competition. All right, we're going to move on and talk about another form of above equilibrium wage, and that is the minimum wage. When government sets, now a labor union is not government, okay? A labor union is a collective of workers. When government sets a minimum wage, it operates above the equilibrium wage. So right here, okay, circled in the yellow is our normal point of equilibrium wages, the market clearing wage, we call it, the place where those willing to work and those willing to hire find their meeting ground, right? When you have minimum wage, the government says no, the least that a person is allowed to be paid on this scale is here, and it forces suppliers to pay at that point. And it says that it is illegal, and you have to remember that, my friends, okay? It makes it illegal to work at this point. You cannot take a job for below minimum wage legally, okay? And I know that there are, things with servers, but that's because it's made up in tip differentials, okay? I'm talking about all things being equal. And so instead, we have a new price floor that has been set for labor, and that price floor establishes a new minimum for wages. And guess what? That minimum is going to be above the equilibrium in the current market. And that's why we call minimum wage another example of the of above equilibrium wages. Now, minimum wage can cause unemployment. And, you say, well, why doesn't labor unions cause unemployment? Well, it does for people outside the labor union, okay? It keeps people in the labor union employed, but it does cause a lack of employment for those who are outside of labor unions unless they're able to come in and join the union, and then they continue to create that unemployment issue for those outside. That's why Thomas Sowell says labor unions are beneficial to those on the inside looking out and not outside looking in. In minimum wage, because it's government set and it affects so many people on the lower end of the income scale, it keeps out a lot of hiring because corporations or individuals will simply not hire rather than hire a low-skilled worker to work at a wage that they cannot make work and make profitable. And so minimum wage laws are the second example of above equilibrium wages that we set. So when I ask you on the upcoming quiz, give examples of above equilibrium wages, first one you're going to give me is labor unions, right? Second one you're going to give me is minimum wage established by the government. Okay, so those are the two. Now let's talk about a third that we haven't really talked about in too much detail. All right, what about efficiency wages? All right, let me get rid of me for a second here. All right, efficiency wages. What is an efficiency wage? Well, an efficiency wage is when a company pays above equilibrium, and they believe that they are doing this for a reason of efficiency. Now let's ask ourselves a question. When a company pays a worker more than they have to for a specific job, in other words, what the market is saying, remember our old supply and demand curve, right? What the market is saying is that the wage that you need to pay for this job is located right here, okay? But an efficiency wage is paying somewhere above that. Why? Why does an efficiency wage, why would a corporation pay someone more than they need to? Well, the answer to this question is going to determine which of the two pictures you pick to help answer the question. So think of it this way. If a company was paying you more than you're really worth, okay, on a graph, would you see that as a beautiful meadow? Would you see that corporation as a wonderful, wonderful place to work and everything is green and sunshine and beauty and blue skies? Or would you see it as a fence keeping you out? Well, this goes back to Thomas Sowell's idea. If you don't work here, okay, then efficiency wages are actually bad news for you, because not only do you not work at this corporation, but they're willing to keep people inside the corporation and pay them more than the market bears. So even though you're right here and you're saying to the corporation, hey, I'm willing to work for you at the cross point of supply and demand, in other words, I'm willing to work for you for less than the person you currently have employed, instead, they are happy to keep the workers that they have and pay them what's called an efficiency wage. Now, why would a corporation do that? Well, a corporation, or it can even be an individual hirer, it can be a sole proprietor or a partnership. Why do they pay efficiency wages? Well, they might have a number of reasons why they pay efficiency wages. Number one, it could be temporary. I think this was the example we used in class where you have a web designer and you don't want them quitting right now because it's a bad time for the corporation to lose the web designer. And so you pay them more than they're really worth to keep them around for a bit longer. And then maybe later you can go out and find someone for the price that the market bears. But corporations or individuals, proprietorships, partnerships, firms, they might say, well, I want to pay someone efficiency wages. I want to pay them a higher wage. And the reason why is because I don't like a lot of turnover. Let's give that reason number one. I don't like a lot of turnover. I don't like having new people coming into the business all the time. I like to keep my employment steady. I like to keep people who have been around the corporation for a long time, and I feel like they know the mission and they understand it well. I like to keep them around. Sorry guys, I'm struggling here a little bit. Okay, I've had to re-record some videos today, so it's been a long day. Secondly, sometimes a corporation might keep somebody around, or a partnership, a proprietorship, whoever, a firm might keep them around just because they've put some money and some investment into training that person. And to train a new person, even though they get paid less, is not exactly a proposition that they're excited about. And so they don't want to have to train a new person. They don't want to have to lose a long time employee. Another reason they might pay efficiency wages is because they don't necessarily believe that there's going to be a whole lot of qualified people for their particular circumstance. The timing isn't right for their business. They believe that they can get more productivity out of a person if they pay them an efficiency wage. They'd say, okay, yes, I can go hire someone at this level of the marketplace. I can go hire someone at the price of the price clearing market price of the price equilibrium, wage equilibrium, that is. But if I keep a person and I'm willing to pay them more, maybe what they're going to do is become very happy. And they're going to work for my company more than they normally would. They're going to be a good return on the investment. They're going to put my company first. They're not going to try to cheat me out of every dollar. And you know what else? Maybe they're going to be more loyal to the company long term, and they're not going to leave. So when I hire someone exactly at the market clearing price, maybe they're going to find another job that's just a little bit better, a little bit closer to their house, or a little bit, right, whatever the case. And so maybe I want to pay above equilibrium wage, efficiency wage, just to keep them on for a little bit longer. And I don't want them going and finding another job. I'm willing to pay them more to stay. There can be lots of reasons why corporations or individuals, firms might pay an efficiency wage. Is it bad? It's only bad if that tendency starts to create a lot of unemployment for people outside of the corporation. And it's bad from the perspective of people who are looking to get jobs, because it makes it difficult for an outsider to compete when a corporation is paying efficiency wages. But you have to understand, sometimes corporations will pay efficiency wages because they want to avoid the government's action in number one, or they want to avoid the formation of a labor union. When a company has to deal with a labor union or with minimum wage, it's a lot more regulation and a lot more to deal with. And so sometimes they pay an efficiency wage because they don't want to get involved on the other two issues. And so they'll say, well, there are companies that are experimenting with efficiency wages right now and saying to the government, don't give us a $15 minimum wage. Don't push this on us, because we're paying efficiency wages already, and we're happy to do so if it means keeping you out. Some corporations might also do that if they don't want to see a labor union form and they still want to have an open door policy between management and workers, and they want to avoid having a middleman of a union. So there's lots of reasons why companies might pay efficiency wages, but no matter what their reasons, they're still above equilibrium wage. So I hope you understand how those three examples, labor unions, collectively bargained wages, minimum wages, and efficiency wages, are all examples of above equilibrium wage. In only one of those examples, minimum wage, the government is setting it. Okay, so don't get confused and say above equilibrium wages are only when government's involved. No, efficiency wages are when a corporation decides to do it, or an individual. Labor unions are when a labor union is involved. It's only with minimum wage that the government is involved in above equilibrium wages. Okay, all right. And now we're going to move on and talk about one more topic in this video, okay? I'm happy this thing is a little bit shorter than some of the more recent ones. We're going to talk a little bit about what about discrimination. I'm going to ask you to watch a couple of videos that Thomas Sowell is in, but I want us to think about this topic first. I'm also going to ask you to do some reading of the chapter, some pages. This chapter ends with a discussion about discrimination in the workplace. Look at that first question. What happens when you don't hire and your refusal to hire someone is based on their race, their creed, their ethnicity, their gender? What about discrimination in employment? And how often does it happen? I think that the media would lead us to think that this happens all of the time. I want you to listen to some statistics from your textbook. And I want you to go and do this because I'm asking you to, and I want you to do what I ask you to as your teacher. But I also want to whet your interest a little bit about some statistics right here. Listen to these statistics from Mankiw's text. I'm reading from page 422. It says the median black man in the United States is paid 22% less than the median white man. And the median black woman is paid 13% less than the median white woman. The differences by sex are also significant. The median white woman is paid 24% less than the median white man, and the median black woman is paid 16% less than the median black man. Taken at face value, these differentials look like evidence that employers discriminate against blacks and women. And so Mankiw goes on to ask the question, does economics say that this is true? And do those statistics point to discrimination, or do they point to something else? It's a very interesting topic. And what he says is that economists tried to get through the hype and the emotion that clearly would surround these issues. And these issues can also be issues not just of hyper emotion, but also of morality and right and wrong. But Mankiw says we have to deal with what the facts are on these issues, actually. And so Mankiw and other economists will like to say that actually economics offers its own answer to this. And so a secondary question is, what happens when you pay someone differently in a discriminatory fashion? Okay, so you don't hire or you pay differently, as in the pay differentials I just read. And then another question, if someone is paid differently and they are of a different race or a different gender, is that always discriminatory based on race or gender, or could those pay differences really belong into another category, let's say human capital or compensating differentials? It's kind of interesting that our theories back from the beginning of the week may have some play here. And I think you'll be surprised at some of the explanations that Mankiw offers and his take on whether or not employer discrimination really happens all of that often. In fact, he argues that discrimination against employees in the area of race, gender, creed, ethnicity, that actually happens mostly only in two cases. And you might be surprised at what the two cases are. They are cases where the consumer is willing to discriminate, and they are also cases where government discriminates. Sometimes we believe that government is the great savior that stops all discrimination, but Mankiw and other economists offer us a little bit of a different perspective on this. So what I want you to do in preparation for the end of the week and in preparation for next week's test, where I'm going to ask you to write a short essay about this topic, I want you to read The Economics of Discrimination. This is on Mankiw, okay, not the Soul text, although Soul also deals with this in a similar way. 422, I want you to read 422, and I want you to read it through 427. 422 through 427. Take a look at what Mankiw has to say about employer discrimination on the basis of race, creed, color, gender, etc., and see what he says the answer that economists have to this question that is a question that's posed by the media, it's posed by individuals, but it also is a question with moral, ethical, and even spiritual dimensions. And let's take a look and see what Man-Q has to say. I'd also like you to watch the other videos that I'm going to put up under this section so that you can consider what different economists have had to say about discrimination. All right, so you'll enjoy that, reading 422 to 427 again in your Man-Q text to consider this as we round out this week. All right.